The wind howled through the quiet farmland as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the weathered barn. The air felt thick, heavy with something that wasn't right. Miles away from the nearest town, this was his world, his farm, his life. Darnell stood at the edge of his field, his worn boots pressing into the dirt. His hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the handle of his shovel, as if it were the only thing holding him together. His muscles were tense, the veins in his arms bulging beneath the sleeves of his faded shirt. His eyes were locked on the horizon, where a small dust cloud rose into the air. Something was coming. The silence that usually enveloped the farm was broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the rustle of the wind. But today, it felt different. The stillness had a sharp edge to it, like a breath held too long. Darnell could feel it in his gut, deep in his bones. That something wasn't just off, it was wrong. He had built this life from nothing, the dirt under his nails, a reminder of how far he had come. A small farm, a simple life, far from the chaos he had once known. The Navy had been a different world, a world he hadn't seen in years, a world he hadn't wanted to remember. But some things never stayed buried. As the dust cloud grew closer, Darnell's grip on the shovel tightened. His gaze remained steady, unblinking, the muscle in his jaw twitching. Then, from behind the barn, figures appeared, shadows against the setting sun, moving in his direction. They were too deliberate, too purposeful, and too many. He didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. The unmistakable swagger, the slight shuffle of boots, gangsters, people who had no business on his land. The same kind of people who had tormented the neighborhood back in the city, the ones he had managed to escape, the ones who had no idea who they were dealing with. Darnell's mind raced as his past began to resurface like a storm crashing against the calm of his new life. He had left all of that behind. The blood, the betrayal, the secrets. He had chosen peace, chosen simplicity. But now, these men were here, and they weren't going anywhere. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned as he approached. His eyes were cold, calculating, as if he could already see how this was going to end. Behind him, the others fanned out, creating a semicircle around Darnell. "You've got a nice little spot here, farmer," the man said, his voice low but mocking. "But this farm, this life, it's over now." Darnell's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He didn't respond. The shovel in his hands felt heavier now, but he kept his stance, steady and unyielding. The man continued, clearly amused by the silence. "You know, we've got a problem. You're in the way. This farm, it's prime real estate, and you, well, you're just a little bump on the road." The gang laughed, the sound sharp and uncomfortable, echoing across the fields. Darnell didn't flinch, he didn't even blink. He had been through worse. The man with the scar stepped closer, his boots crunching the dry grass. "I'd suggest you step aside, but I think you might enjoy the fight." "Right, soldier." That was it. The word hit Darnell like a slap to the face. Soldier, a word from his past that he thought he had buried, a life he had fought to forget. The scarred man saw it in Darnell's eyes, the flicker of recognition. A smirk spread across his face. He knew, they all did. "You think I didn't know? You don't look like the typical farmhand, do you? Not with those scars, not with those eyes, the way you carry yourself. I've seen it before." Darnell's jaw tightened, but he didn't let the anger show. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of something dangerous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." The gang leader chuckled darkly. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. The ex-Navy SEAL, who thought he could retire." "What? You think you can just hide out here in the middle of nowhere?" Darnell's heart rate quickened, but he kept his composure. The past was rising, taking shape, but he wasn't going to let it control him again. He wasn't that man anymore. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," Darnell said, his voice firm. "You get in your truck, drive off, and forget you ever saw this place. That's the only warning you're getting." The scarred man laughed again, louder this time. "You think I'm scared of you? You're a farmer now. Nobody." That's where he was wrong. Darnell wasn't just a farmer. He wasn't just some quiet man who grew crops and tended to animals. He was a warrior, a protector, a man who had once taken down enemies in places far worse than this dusty field. And now, it was time for them to realize just who they had come for. "Last chance," Darnell said, his voice steady as a rock. "Get out, now." The gang leader's smile faded as he recognized the resolve in Darnell's eyes. He stepped back, looking to the others for some sign of support, but the hesitation was there, the uncertainty, the doubt. But before any of them could react, Darnell moved. It was a blur. The shovel became an extension of his body as he swung it with lethal precision, the force of the blow knocking the nearest man to the ground before he even knew what happened. Another one lunged, but Darnell sidestepped, using his opponent's momentum against him and sending him crashing into the dirt with a well-placed throw. The remaining men hesitated. They didn't know what to do. They weren't used to resistance, especially from someone who looked like he had no fight left in him. But Darnell wasn't just anyone. The scarred man took a step back, fear finally creeping into his eyes. "You're insane," he muttered. "Not insane," Darnell replied, his voice cold, just trained. He moved again, faster than the gang could react, taking them down one by one. The battle was swift, over before it had truly begun. When it was done, the field was quiet once more. The only sound was the wind, now carrying the distant cries of the defeated men. Darnell stood tall, his chest heaving with the exertion, but his eyes were cold. He had been pushed to the edge, but now the past had come crashing back, and he wasn't going to let anyone take what was his dot. As the last man stumbled to his feet, Darnell's voice rang out clear and strong. "Leave, now, and never come back." The gang didn't argue. They ran, dragging their injured and broken bodies with them, leaving Darnell standing in the middle of the field. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past lift. But he knew this was far from over. They would be back. And this time, he would be ready. The sun had set, casting an eerie orange glow over the field. Darnell stood motionless, staring at the path where the gang had fled. His heart was still pounding, the adrenaline from the fight coursing through his veins, but his mind was already racing. He knew they wouldn't be gone for long. There was no way they would let it end like this. He didn't want to admit it, but the truth was there, lurking in the back of his mind. The gang had come after him, but there was something more at play here, something bigger. They hadn't just stumbled onto his land, they had come for him. Specifically, Darnell took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as he turned away from the field and headed toward the barn. He needed to think, he needed to prepare. The barn door creaked as he pushed. It opened, the familiar scent of hay and wood filling his nostrils. It was a smell that had once been comforting, a reminder of the life he had worked so hard to build. But tonight, it felt different. The walls, once a sanctuary, now seemed to close in on him. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders. The shadows inside the barn were long and deep, the only light coming from the dim glow of a single lamp hanging from the ceiling. Darnell walked past the stacks of hay bales, his boots kicking up dust with each step, until he reached the far corner. There, hidden under a tarp, was the one thing he had hoped to never use again. His old duffel bag. It had been years since he'd even looked at it, years since he'd needed to. But now, with danger so close, the bag felt like a lifeline. He pulled it out from beneath the tarp, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he unzipped it. Inside were the tools of a different life, a tactical vest, several handguns, a few combat knives, and a stash of ammunition. The items were well worn but still functional, still dangerous. He ran his fingers over the gear, each item a reminder of the man he used to be. A Navy SEAL, a soldier who had fought in wars, endured betrayals, and faced enemies so ruthless that they made the gang outside look like children. He had left that life behind, buried it along with the memories of bloodshed and loss. But the world had a way of dragging the past back into the present, no matter how far you tried to run. Darnell's eyes flicked to the window, where the last traces of sunlight were fading into the horizon. The gang would be back, and when they did, he wouldn't be caught off guard again. He would be ready, but that was the easy part. He knew that the real battle was yet to come. The gang wasn't just after his land, they wanted him. The man who had once been someone to fear. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they were about to learn. He closed the duffel bag, securing it tightly, and then reached for the phone in his pocket. He hesitated for a moment before dialing the number he had been avoiding for months. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. Darnell. The voice on the other end was gruff, tinged with a mixture of surprise and caution. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." Darnell leaned against the wooden wall, his thumb brushing over the phone. "I need help," he said, his voice low but firm. They're coming for me. I don't know who they are, but they know who I am. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You should have called me sooner. What do you need? I need everything, Darnell replied, his mind already working through the plan. Weapons, intel, and someone who can help me deal with these guys. I can't do this alone. The voice on the other end sighed. I'll make some calls. You won't be alone, but you're in deep. Darnell, don't let your guard down. Not for a second. Darnell hung up without saying another word, the weight of the conversation settling over him. He wasn't sure who he could trust anymore, but there was no turning back now. The world he had left behind was pulling him back in, and he had to face it, head dash on dot. As the night settled in, Darnell took a final look at the barn, making sure everything was locked up tight. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that his life was about to change forever. The peace he had fought for was slipping through his fingers, and there was no way to stop it. He stepped outside, the cool night air hitting his face as he made his way to his truck. His hands were steady now, the rush of adrenaline replaced by the cold clarity of purpose. He had lived through hell before. This wasn't anything new. That as he drove through the darkened countryside, the headlights cutting through the darkness, his mind kept returning to the fight earlier that day. He had taken down the gang members easily enough, but that wasn't the real battle. The real battle was coming. Darnell's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of his phone. He glanced down at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. The message was short but to the point. We know who you are, Darnell, and we're not done with you yet. You've been warned. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. So they were watching. So they knew. It was no longer just a fight for his farm, it was a fight for his life. The truck rumbled down the road, the engine humming in the silence of the night. Darnell's eyes darted from side to side, scanning for any sign of danger. He knew the gang would be back, but what he didn't know was why they were targeting him. His past was supposed to be buried, forgotten, but now, it seemed it had a way of crawling out of the grave. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a piece of land. This was personal. He pulled into the driveway of his small farmhouse, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. As the truck came to a stop, he noticed the faint glow of headlights in the distance. Someone was coming, but who? Darnell's hand instinctively reached for the handgun at his side, his body tense as he waited for whatever would come next. The quiet night was now filled with the hum of uncertainty, and he knew that he was no longer just a farmer. He was a man with a target on his back, a man who was about to find out just how deep the game went. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle neared, its engine roaring in the night. Darnell held his breath. Whoever it was, they weren't here for a friendly visit. A figure stepped out of the truck as it came to a stop in front of him. A familiar face. Darnell, the man said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. We need to talk. The man who stepped out of the truck was tall, his face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the surroundings before landing on Darnell. There was a time when seeing this face would have been a relief, but tonight it felt more like a shadow of the past Darnell had hoped to forget. Marcus, Darnell said, his voice calm but his heart racing. What are you doing here? Marcus, a former ally from his Navy SEAL days, didn't waste any time. He walked toward Darnell, his boots heavy against the gravel, his expression tense. I could ask you the same thing, Marcus replied, his gaze sharp as a blade. You've been off the grid for how long now? You really thought they wouldn't come for you? Darnell didn't respond immediately. He was trying to make sense of everything: the attack earlier, the sudden message, the feeling of being hunted. His past was creeping back, faster than he could run. Marcus had always been a reminder of who Darnell used to be, but now that past was forcing its way into the present, and he wasn't ready to face it. I thought I was done with all of this, Darnell said, his voice low but carrying the weight of years of silence. I didn't want this life anymore. Marcus nodded, understanding but not agreeing. You can never outrun who you are, Darnell, and they're not just coming for you because of some old farm. They know what you're capable of, and they want it. They want you. Darnell's grip on the truck's door tightened, his knuckles going white. Why now? Why after all this time? Marcus's gaze softened, just for a moment, because the world never forgets. People like you, people like me, we leave a mark, and now, they want to make sure that mark is gone. The silence between them grew thick, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Darnell knew Marcus was right. No matter how far he ran, the ghosts of his past would always catch up to him. But this time, it wasn't just his past that was in danger. It was his future, the life he had built with his own hands. The quiet farm, the peace he had fought so hard to preserve. What do they want? Darnell asked, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. Marcus looked around, checking the dark horizon. You're not just a target because you're a SEAL. They want the skills you have, the experience. There are people out there, dangerous people who will pay good money to have someone like you on their side. And these gang members, they're just pawns in a much bigger game. Darnell felt a nod tighten in his stomach. This was no longer just about a gang of thugs. It was about something far worse, something much more dangerous. His past was no longer just a shadow, was coming back with a vengeance. I'm not getting involved in that world again, Darnell said, his voice firm. Marcus's face darkened. You don't have a choice. You may have left that life behind, but that life didn't leave you. You're not just going to sit here and wait for them to take what's yours, are you? Darnell's thoughts raced. He could feel the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. He had left the military, left the violence, left the betrayals. But now, his past was knocking at the door, and it wasn't just a ghost, it was real. It was here, and it wasn't going away. I'll fight them, Darnell said. Finally, his voice was calm but resolute. But not for anyone else, not for their cause. I'll fight them for what's mine. For this farm. Marcus's lips curled into a half smile, but his eyes stayed serious. That's the spirit. But you'll need more than just your old instincts, Darnell. You're going to need help, and you're going to need a plan. Darnell knew Marcus was right. He had the skills, but they were rusty, and he was alone. The farm was isolated, but that didn't mean he couldn't make it work to his advantage. He had learned how to survive in the worst conditions, how to fight when the odds were stacked against him. But now, he had to think smarter, think bigger. I'm not going to wait for them to come to me, Darnell said, his voice gaining strength. I'll go to them, and when I do, I'll make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's what I like to hear. But you're not going in blind. We've got work to do. We'll need weapons, intel, and a lot more muscle if you're going to make it through this. Darnell turned to face him fully, his eyes narrowing with determination. I've already got some weapons, and I've been gathering intel on the gang. But I'm not going to stop there. I want everything. Their connections, their operations, whatever it takes. Marcus's eyes lit up with approval. Now that's the Darnell I remember. But remember, this isn't just about taking them down. It's about making them wish they'd never heard your name. It's about sending a message. Darnell felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. The plan was starting to take shape, and for the first time since the gang showed up, he felt like he was in control. But he knew the road ahead would be long, and it would be filled with danger at every turn. He would need all the help he could get and a lot of luck. You'll help me? Darnell asked, turning to Marcus. Not Marcus met his gaze, his face hardening. You think I'm going to leave you hanging now? We've been through too much together. I've got your back. But you have to understand one thing. This isn't just a fight for survival. This is a fight for your life, and for your future. Darnell nodded, his mind already spinning with the possibilities. He had a plan, but plans were only as good as the people executing them. He needed allies, people who understood the stakes, and were willing to risk everything to take down the gang that was hunting him. I'll make some calls, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. We'll need everything: connections, resources, muscle. You're not facing this alone. Darnell watched as Marcus spoke into the phone, his voice low and urgent. The wheels were in motion now. There was no going back. As Marcus walked away to make more calls, Darnell stood still, his thoughts racing. The night was still, but in his mind, the storm was already building. The fight for his farm, for his survival, was just beginning. But this time, it wasn't just about keeping his land. It was about reclaiming his life and making sure no one ever forgot the name Darnell. The past had come back to find him, and this time, he wasn't running. He was fighting. The days that followed were a blur, each one a combination of preparation and tension. Darnell spent most of his time in the barn, making adjustments to his weapons and checking his gear. His body, once used to the routine of hard work on the farm, was now becoming accustomed to the weight of his past. Every day, the threat loomed closer, and with it, the realization that there was no going back. Marcus had kept his word. His contacts came through, and soon enough, Darnell had a small group of people willing to help him. They weren't just any people, these were individuals who knew how to fight, how to survive, and, most importantly, how to get things done when the odds were stacked against them. They were his team now, and they were all in. The farm, once a peaceful refuge, had become a staging ground. The barn was now filled with equipment, medical supplies, and a few familiar faces. A few of Marcus's old connections had arrived in the dead of night, bringing more than just guns. They brought the tools needed for a war, and Darnell wasn't about to waste them. The quiet of the countryside was deceptive. On the surface, everything appeared, normal cows grazing, the wind rustling through the trees, the smell of fresh earth in the air. But underneath that calm, Darnell could feel the tension growing. His farm had become a target. His life had become a battleground. That afternoon, as he stood by the edge of the property, watching the horizon, the sound of a truck engine broke the silence. It was a sound he had learned to recognize over the years, a sound that sent a chill through his spine every time he heard it. The truck was coming, and this time, it wasn't the gang. It was Marcus. The vehicle skidded to a halt at the entrance to the driveway, and Marcus stepped out, looking more serious than usual. Darnell could tell something was different. His friend wasn't here to talk about weapons or strategy. He was here with news. Any trouble? Darnell asked, his voice low but steady. Marcus shook his head, but there was a tension in his eyes. It's not good, Darnell. They've stepped it up. We're not just dealing with small-time criminals anymore. These guys, they've got connections, bigger than anything we thought. Darnell's stomach twisted. The weight of Marcus's words sank in, settling like a stone in his chest. What does that mean? It means they're not just after you. They're after everything you know. They're sending a message. Darnell didn't need to ask what kind of message. The gang was using him as an example, a pawn in a game that was much larger than anything he'd ever imagined. His farm, his life, had become the symbol of something darker, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how deep this rabbit hole went. So, what's the plan? Darnell asked, already knowing that there would be no easy solution. Marcus's jaw clenched. We hit them first. We don't wait for them to come to us. We track down their operations and take them down before they can make their next move. It was a bold move, one that was risky, even by Darnell's standards. But it was the only option they had left. The time for running, for hiding, was over. I'm ready, Darnell said, his voice steady. Let's make it happen. Marcus nodded, his eyes narrowing with the same determination Darnell had seen in countless missions. They both knew this wasn't just about taking down a few gang members. This was about survival. It was about sending a message back to those who thought they could push him around, to those who thought they could take everything from him. The plan was simple, at least on paper. They would track the gang's movements, find out where they were hiding, and strike before they had a chance to regroup. But Darnell knew that nothing was ever that easy. That night, as the group gathered in the barn, Darnell stood at the front, looking over his team. There were a mix of soldiers, mercenaries, and people who had nothing left to lose. The mission wasn't just about taking down the gang, it was personal for each one of them. Darnell could see it in their eyes. The fire, the hunger. We do this right, Darnell said, his voice carrying the weight of their purpose. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we take them down. The room was silent as they nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the mission. There was no turning back now. They were all in. The plan kicked into motion the next morning. Darnell and his team moved like a well-oiled machine, using the cover of the forest and the hills to stay out of sight. They were quiet, methodical. Every step was calculated. Darnell had trained for this, but this wasn't a battlefield. It was his home, and that made everything feel different. As they approached the gang's hideout, Darnell's mind raced. He had fought wars, seen the worst of humanity, but this felt different. These weren't faceless enemies. They were people who had come for him, come for his life. They had a personal stake in this, and Darnell wasn't about to let them win. The hideout was a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, an old building that looked abandoned. But Darnell knew better. The gang was here, hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right moment to strike. And they were waiting for him. Darnell signaled to his team, and they began to move into position. They worked in silence, their movements coordinated and precise. Darnell's heart beat steadily in his chest, each thud a reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about survival. This was about taking back control. As they neared the warehouse, Darnell's mind flashed back to his time in the Navy. He had been in countless situations like this, but nothing had ever felt as personal as this. Every step he took toward that warehouse was a step toward reclaiming his life, his farm, his peace. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. Reached the back of the warehouse, and Darnell motioned for his team to spread out. It was time to make their move. With a single nod, he signaled the attack. The team stormed the building, moving with the precision of soldiers who had trained together for years. Darnell led the charge, his hand tight around his weapon as he pushed through the door. Inside, the gang was caught off guard, their surprise turning into chaos as Darnell and his team took control of the room. Gunfire rang out, echoing through the concrete walls of the warehouse. Darnell moved quickly, his instincts taking over as he neutralized one threat after another. But he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting for something deeper. He was fighting for his future. The room was quickly cleared, but Darnell knew this wasn't over. He could feel the eyes of the gang members on him, could hear the whispers of fear and anger. They knew who he was now. They knew what he was capable of. A voice from behind caught his attention. "You think you've won," the leader of the gang said, his voice dripping with malice. "You've only just started. This is bigger than you." Darnell turned, his eyes narrowing as he approached the leader. "It's over," he said, his voice cold. "You're done." But as he spoke, Darnell could see the fear in the leader's eyes. The fight was over, but the war was just beginning. This was far from over, and Darnell wasn't finished yet. The silence after the fight was deafening. The warehouse, once bustling with noise, now lay in stillness. The only sounds, the heavy breathing of Darnell's team and the distant hum of the wind outside. He stood among the fallen, his eyes scanning the room as he caught his breath. The fight had been fast, brutal, but it was far from over. The leader of the gang, the one who had tried to make a mockery of him, was now kneeling before him, his hands bound tightly behind his back. Fear radiated from him, his eyes wide, darting between Darnell and the men who stood around him. "You should have stayed out of this," Darnell said, his voice a low growl, each word dripping with authority. His eyes locked onto the leaders, making sure he knew exactly who was in control now. "This was never your fight." The gang leader, breathing heavily, tried to stand, but Darnell kicked his leg out, knocking him back to the floor. "Stay down," Darnell spat. "You're not in charge anymore." Darnell stepped over him, moving toward the center of the room where a map was spread out on a table. His fingers traced the lines, the locations marked with red ink. This wasn't just some random gang trying to intimidate a farmer. This was something bigger. He knew it. The map, the connections, the way they had moved with such precision, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than just this one gang. "Boss," one of his team members called from the back of the warehouse, his voice filled with urgency. "We've got a problem." Darnell turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm as he moved to the back of the room. There, standing in the shadows, was another figure. A man Darnell didn't recognize, but who seemed far too comfortable in this situation. The man was tall, his features hard and unreadable, his eyes scanning the room with a cold detachment. He wasn't a part of the gang, that much was clear, but he didn't seem like someone who would be afraid of a fight. "You must be Darnell," the man said, his voice smooth and calm, as though they were meeting for the first time on neutral ground. Darnell's hand never left his gun as he sized up the newcomer. "And you are." The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was one of those smiles that made you feel like you were being sized up, measured, as if you were already a pawn in someone else's game. "I'm the one who's been watching you for a while," he replied. "The one who's been making sure you stayed out of things. But you've made it hard for me to keep my distance, haven't you?" Darnell's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked over Darnell's team, his gaze moving from one person to the next. "You've got quite the little operation here, Darnell. I have to say, I'm impressed. But you've made a mistake. You think you can just take these guys down and walk away unscathed. That's not how it works." The words hit Darnell like a cold slap to the face. His mind raced, trying to process everything. This wasn't just about the gang anymore. It was bigger. They weren't just trying to kill him or take his land. They were trying to make a statement, and the man standing in front of him was a part of that statement. "I don't know what you're playing at," Darnell said, his voice low, "but you're not going to intimidate Me. You think you can come in here, throw your weight around, and expect me to just sit down? The man chuckled, the sound cold and humorless. Oh, Darnell, you misunderstand. I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to offer you a choice. You can join us, help us run things, and we'll make sure your little farm stays safe. Or, you can refuse, and I'll make sure you never see tomorrow. Darnell's blood ran cold. He had heard these kinds of threats before back in his Navy days, but this felt different. There was something in the man's eyes, something calculating, that made him realize just how deep this went. This wasn't just about taking him down. It was about control, power, the kind of power that could destroy everything Darnell had built. I've got nothing to offer you, Darnell said, his voice steady, but inside, his heart pounded. And I'm not interested in playing your games. The man's smile faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. Pity. I was hoping you'd see reason. But it seems you're too stubborn for your own good. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Darnell's. I'll make sure you regret this. The words hung in the air like a threat, and Darnell felt the weight of them sink in. But before he could respond, the sound of a distant engine interrupted the tense moment. It was the unmistakable roar of a truck speeding down the dirt road toward the warehouse. The man's expression shifted to one of annoyance, and he turned toward the door. I'll be back, he said, his voice cold and calculated. We'll finish this later, Darnell. Without another word, the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving Darnell and his team to process the situation. Darnell's heart was still racing, but now there was a sense of urgency in the air. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just another enemy to be defeated. He was part of something far bigger, something that Darnell had no idea how to fight. The truck outside roared louder, and Darnell motioned for his team to get into position. There was no time to waste. Whoever was coming wasn't friendly, and Darnell didn't intend to be caught off guard again. As the team moved into position, Darnell's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about taking down an entire network, a network that had already shown it could reach into every part of his life and tear it apart. Darnell wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. The truck skidded to a halt, its tires throwing up dust as it came to a stop in front of the warehouse. The sound of doors slamming echoed in the night as figures began to emerge from the vehicle. This time, there was no mistaking it. This wasn't just a few gang members showing up. These were soldiers, real soldiers, and they weren't here to talk. Darnell's team had already taken up positions, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. He could feel the tension in the air, the palpable sense of danger closing in. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for control. And this time, Darnell wasn't going to let them take it. Stay sharp, he whispered to his team, his voice low but firm. This is it. Don't let them get the upper hand. The figures moved closer, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Darnell's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. He had to stop them before they could reach the warehouse, before they could get the drop on them. As the first soldier stepped into the warehouse, Darnell made his move. He sprang from his position, his body moving with precision and speed as he launched himself toward the intruder. The fight was on, and Darnell was ready to make sure it would be the last one they ever started. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Darnell's body slammed into the first soldier, knocking him off balance and sending them both crashing to the floor. The sound of boots and gunfire filled the air, but Darnell didn't focus on the noise. He focused on the man beneath him, his hands working with practiced precision to subdue him. A quick twist, a swift movement, and the soldier was out, cold. But Darnell didn't pause. He rolled to his feet, scanning the room for his next target. His team was already in action, moving like shadows in the night, neutralizing one threat after another. This wasn't just a fight. This was a war, and Darnell was ready to finish it. The soldiers weren't just soldiers. They were mercenaries, professionals, and they fought with a coldness that Darnell had come to expect from his old life. But he wasn't the same man anymore. He had something they didn't, something that made him dangerous. He wasn't just a trained killer. He was a man fighting for everything he had built, for the life he had fought so hard to protect. The leader of the mercenaries, the man Darnell had spoken to earlier, was nowhere in sight. But Darnell could feel his presence, like a shadow lurking, just beyond his reach. The man was here, somewhere, and Darnell knew the fight wasn't over until he had taken him down. His eyes flicked to the far corner of the room. where a figure moved stealthily in the shadows. Darnell's instincts kicked in, and without hesitation, he lunged forward, grabbing the figure by the arm and slamming them into the wall. His hand wrapped around their throat before they had a chance to react. "Who sent you?" Darnell growled, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't have time for games. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The mercenary's eyes widened with fear, but he refused to answer. Darnell tightened his grip, a silent warning that he wasn't going to let go until he got what he wanted. "I'll ask you again," Darnell said, his voice a deadly whisper. "Who sent you?" The mercenary gasped for air, his face turning. "Read," but still, he didn't speak. It wasn't until Darnell squeezed tighter that the man finally spoke, his voice weak but trembling. They work for someone higher up," he managed to choke out. "You're nothing but a pawn in a bigger game." The words hit Darnell like a punch to the gut. Higher up, someone bigger. The realization struck him like lightning. This wasn't just about his farm. It wasn't just about him. This was part of something much larger, something that reached farther than he could have ever imagined. Before Darnell could press for more answers, a sharp sound echoed from behind him, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. He spun around, releasing the mercenary, and found himself face to face with the man he had been hunting all along. The leader. The man stood a few feet away, a smug grin on his face. The barrel of his gun pointed directly at Darnell. His eyes gleamed with a twisted sense of satisfaction, as if he had already won. "You really thought you could win this fight, didn't you?" The leader taunted, his voice filled with arrogance. "You're just one man. You can't stop this." Darnell's heart raced, but his mind stayed calm. He had been in situations like this before. He knew how to survive. He wasn't going to back down now, not when everything was on the line. "You don't get it," Darnell said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me. This is about everything you're trying to destroy, and you're not going to win." The leader laughed, a cold, mocking sound that made Darnell's blood boil. "You think you're the hero of this story," he said, his smile widening. "You're just a soldier with a few lucky shots. You can't stop us. You're nothing." Darnell didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He knew what was coming next. The leader had underestimated him, just like everyone else, and now it was time to make him regret it. With lightning speed, Darnell lunged forward, knocking the leader's gun to the side and delivering a powerful punch to his jaw. The man staggered back, his grip on the gun faltering, and Darnell took advantage of the moment. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the gun and pointed it at the leader. "The tables now turned. You're done," Darnell said, his voice cold and unwavering. "You've been playing with the wrong man." The leader's expression faltered, his arrogance replaced by fear. He raised his hands in surrender, but it was too late. Darnell had already made his decision. With a final decisive movement, Darnell pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse, the sound of finality ringing in the air. The leader collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. Darnell stood over him, his chest heaving, the weight of the moment sinking. The battle was over. The man who had orchestrated everything was gone, but the war was far from finished. He turned to his team, his eyes scanning each of them. They had done their part. They had fought hard, and now they stood victorious. But Darnell knew this wasn't the end. There were more questions, more enemies lurking in the shadows, and he wasn't going to rest until he uncovered the truth. One of his team members approached, his face grim but determined. "What now?" he asked, his voice low. Darnell took a deep breath, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Now we take the fight to them. We find out who's behind all of this, and we make them pay. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about justice." As the team gathered around him, Darnell felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He had fought for his life, for his farm, and for the future he had built. But now, the fight was bigger than that. It was about taking down an empire that thought it could control people like him, and Darnell wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't just a former Navy SEAL anymore. He wasn't just a farmer. He was a man who had been pushed too far, a man who had nothing left to lose, and the world was about to learn. That Darnell was a force to be reckoned with. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a golden light across the battlefield, Darnell knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for his life, for his future, was far from over. But one thing was certain, he was ready, and no one was going to take that from him. The end.